Looking at this workshop behind me, you might think it's out of reach for most people getting into woodworking, but I started small, just like anyone else, and so this video is not necessarily going to be showing you round, but it's actually going to be talking about how I got here as someone still figuring things out in their 20s. And I say figuring out because if we just do a quick 180, I'm going to come clean about something. Most of you will know this as my van conversion that I've been struggling to find the time and the money to work on, but what only my closest friends and family have known until this point is that I'm already living in this thing, and I have done for the past 2 years. You know, it's been pretty damn tough the past few years from a personal perspective, and as a result I had to cut my salary to almost nothing to keep as much money in the business as possible to both help it survive and grow out of the mess I let it get to. Hence why I found myself in this situation, but fortunately that is about to change. I'm about to go back to living in an actual house again, but there's a reason I'm showing you this, because while I could have just got a normal 9 to 5 to provide me a safe and secure income, this was a personal choice, and it leads on to the first point I wanted to make in this video, which is sacrifice. So I got into woodworking back in 2012 when a teacher I had at school brought in a box that he'd made, and upon seeing this box for the first time, a switch flicked in my brain, and suddenly I realised that craftsmanship of this quality doesn't just come out of the ground. Actual humans make this kind of stuff, and if I were to put in the effort, I could too. So upon kind of probing him about this as a potential career path, he responded by saying this: "You'll never make millions, but you'll also never work a day in your life." And I can say that 12 years later, this quote still stands up, with exception to navigating Brexit as a business owner. That was a fucking nightmare. So anyway, prior to this interaction, I'd actually already secured a place at the college where all of my friends, without exception, were going to. But upon realising I wanted to do woodworking instead, I went and visited Wood Furniture Centre in Oxford and fell in love with it the second I saw it. Much like you probably will when you see some of the wood I've got back here. So in order to go and study furniture making, I had to sacrifice going to the same college that all of my friends, without exception, went to. And don't get me wrong, as a shy, somewhat awkward teenager, this was very out of character for me, and to this day, I'm actually a very risk-averse person. But to me at the time, it was an absolute no-brainer, and this was the start of a completely new and exciting chapter of my life, and unbeknown to me, the start of many more sacrifices I had to make in order to get to where I am now. So after about a year or so of studying at Wood Furniture Centre, Axminster Tools and Machinery opened a store in my hometown, and upon hounding them on social media for weeks on end, I managed to secure a job there on weekends. And what this kind of eventually led on to was for the next 4 or 5 years, I was studying 5 days a week at Wood and then working the remaining 2 at Axminster Tools. And these kind of worked hand in hand, because what I was able to do at Wood was obviously learn skills, practice them and refine them over many years and learn my kind of own style of working. Whereas at Axminster, I was learning a lot more about the theory of tools, like how they're kind of manufactured, what the average user kind of struggles with, because as I was learning at Wood, I was kind of coming out of touch with what my early struggles were. And having Axminster there kind of really helped me stay in touch with that. And this kind of understanding of what the average user struggles with is how series like Tool Duel, for example, were born from. So as you can probably see, those 2 experiences, Axminster and Wood, supplemented each other incredibly well. And I credit most of all of this to the solid foundation that those 2 places provided me. But as you can also probably imagine, working 7 days a week at such a young age didn't come without sacrifice, and I had to face that dilemma frequently during that time. This is the wood turning room, by the way. So I've been on YouTube now for 8 years or so. However, this isn't the first time I've had a YouTube channel. When I was growing up, my mates and I were introduced to Jackass at far too young of an age, and we set out doing our own stunts and posting them on YouTube. And in addition to this, while growing up, I had a lot of entrepreneurial influence from both my dad, who owned a food store, and my stepdad, who was the director of a company. And this entrepreneurial influence clearly rubbed off on me, because at one point I found myself selling contraband goods on the playground at school. Don't worry, they were just sweets. I used to join my dad on his trips to the wholesaler and buy these things for about 55p a pop and then sell them for £1 on the playground, to a captive market. Genius. And also later on, while at Wood, I figured out that as far as veneer is concerned, one person's trash is another person's treasure. And so I used to reach out to large-scale veneer producers asking for their offcuts that were due to be thrown away, either for a discounted rate or just for the cost of shipping it to me. And then once I received them, I labelled them, priced them, and put them on eBay for small-scale makers to purchase. Looking back on this, me having an innate passion for craft mixed with a enjoyment and the fun of making videos, plus all of the entrepreneurial influences I had while growing up, it's almost inevitable that I ended up in a career doing what I'm doing today. But the reason I'm saying this is not to brag about myself, even though that's what us YouTubers are known for, but because these things, or I should say working at Axminster Tools Machinery, studying at Wood, doing the entrepreneurial stuff and making videos, all of that meshing together to create this is a perfect example of something called skill stacking. And what's more, I had no idea I was doing it at the time. This is the prototyping room, by the way. So let's just say that theoretically there is 100 woodworkers on Earth and only the top 10% or so are getting any business. If you want to be in the top 10% of that crowd, you need to be better than 90 other people. This isn't impossible, but is also not easy. Let's say also that there's 100 videographers on Earth and only the top 10% of them are getting any business as well. Again, in order to get any business in this industry, you need to be better than 90 other people. And this is what a lot of people end up doing in their careers. They're just constantly fighting to get to the top of their industry. And it's through no real fault of their own that they're doing this. The school system sets people up for doing this by teaching students a predefined set of skills in a predefined curriculum, at least until you get to later stages where you can kind of do more what you want. And in terms of career advice, the overwhelming consensus is that you should stay in one place and work your way through the ranks until you get to the top. Now, that's not to say this is bad advice. Most people should probably do this. Humanity has achieved so many mental things as a result of people dedicating their lives to one thing and one thing only. I'm not debating that. What I am debating, however, is by blindly giving this advice to everyone, you are constantly suppressing the creativity of people's brains who just aren't wired that way. For people who aren't content with working on one thing at a time, or for those who just want to stand out in their industry, skill stacking is one of the ways in which it can be done. Because if we combine these groups of 100 people specializing in two different things to create an overlap in the middle where they are capable of both woodworking and videography, all of a sudden, to be in the top 10% of this crowd of 20 people, you only need to be better than 18 people as opposed to 80. Here's the key though. There has to be demand for this overlap. You can't just go combining random skills like woodworking and, I don't know, mycology, for example, and expect to find a market of people desiring that overlap, let alone the top 10% of it. It takes humility and, above all, experimentation to find the overlaps that people desire. Sometimes you'll miss, but sometimes you won't, which is why I've converted the spare toilet of my workshop into a mycology lab where I'm figuring out how to grow oyster mushrooms onto my wood waste. And it's going really, really well. I'm hoping to have a video on this out, I don't know, hopefully before Christmas. Here's the other thing about skill stacking though. Multiple skills can be overlapped. One of the things I'm greatly appreciative of with my time at Axminster was them continuously shoving me in front of a crowd, either in stores or at events, and teaching random people I've never met before how to do woodworking. And while I don't consider myself to be a competent public speaker by any stretch of the imagination, the mere fact I'm willing to stand up in front of a crowd and just give it a go is more than most people are willing to do. And if you combine that attitude towards public speaking with the fact I am an experienced voice in woodworking, all of a sudden brands in the woodworking sector who want to promote their products or their services and want an experienced voice to endorse their products have very few options to choose from but me, unfortunately for them. But remember, this outcome isn't a given. If there's no market, you're not going to get results, and you still have to be better than a small subset of people within that crossover. It just so happens that you have much better odds this time around. And this leads on to the next thing that really helped me out. 1 minute. Alexa, turn on the set lights. I love that. So the next thing that really helped me out, and bear with me here because this is going to sound really, really cheesy. The next thing is attitude and accountability. I'm not afraid to admit that my biggest driver in making something of myself is not because I'm running towards something, but rather away from something. And this all started back when I was studying at Wood, when my girlfriend at the time, who I visualised a future with, ended things with me. And this in itself was one of the worst experiences of my life. However, it also stacked with feelings of isolation from neglecting my social life due to the fact I was working 7 days a week, deep-rooted insecurities that I didn't understand at the time, and to top it all off, we had a few untimely presentations at Wood where highly revered industry professionals talked with pessimism about how hard it is to get by as a furniture maker rather than speak positively about it. So not only had my perceived future relationship crumbled, but the career that I was grinding day in and day out to be successful in, according to these industry professionals, was pointless. And so within an instant, it just kind of felt like everything from all directions hit me at once, and all of my passion and purpose was drained, and I felt like I was just left with nothing. Here's the thing though, shit's really difficult. And although of course there is a time for relaxing, looking after yourself, confiding in others if you can, no one else is responsible for your actions other than yourself, and the world isn't going to slow down for you. And there's two ways you can look at this. One with a view of pessimism, where you shake your fist at the world, wishing it were different, and the other with optimism and hope. Trust me, I know how I sound when I say this, but the truth is that pessimism is a zero-sum game against yourself, where the only way you can prove yourself correct is by letting yourself down. And what's more, it's probably going to stop you taking action in the first place because you're already anticipating it going wrong. The inverse of this is optimism, where in order to validate your optimism, something has to go right. And when that thing goes right, it then reinforces the optimism, which then makes you look for more opportunities. It literally becomes a self-driving engine that, while seemingly irrational at times, serves a very, very helpful purpose. And what's more, even when things are going wrong around you, you're still conditioned to find the silver lining. Another example of this is confirmation bias, where you look for reasons to justify why you're correct in something. And just to give you an example of this, look around this room now and count as many things as you can that are the colour red. Cool, right now, tell me how many green things there were. It's a crude example, but people who are conditioned to look for red will always see red in everything they look at because it's what they've told themselves they should be looking for. But by doing that, they prevent themselves from noticing the green things that were there all along. So while my whole perceived future was in tatters at such a young age, had I never put in the work to get myself out of that pit of despair, I'd have probably still been there to this day. By being accountable and responsible for my own recovery and well-being, not only have I had some of the most amazing experiences since then, to the point where I can actually be thankful that those experiences happened, but I now have a reason to continue pushing forward because I never want to feel like that again. Sometimes the biggest setbacks can be the biggest source of motivation. Another way you can be accountable to your future success and fulfillment is by always learning, whether that's picking up new skills, iterating on mistakes you've made, or just surrounding yourself with people who are better than you in areas that you're pretty bad at. And this room is a testament to that. I listen to quite a lot of podcasts, comedy, interviews, education, you name it. But one of the most interesting ones I ever listened to was called How to Get Rich by Naval Ravikant. And the title of this is intentionally provocative, but hear me out. Because within it, he explained a framework that regardless of whether you're starting at zero or if you're a fully established business, the principles still stand. And these principles surround a concept called leverage. Don't be put off by this word. It's literally a metaphor for this action where if we have an outcome we desire, in this case, lifting this stack of 3 heavy boxes, we can apply personal effort to make that outcome happen. But sometimes personal effort alone isn't enough, and we need to think of ways of increasing our leverage to make that output happen, preferably without increasing the effort on our part. So I'll apply the same amount of force here now, and I should have thought that one through. Oh, bugger. So as you can see from those 2 examples, the load didn't change whatsoever, and neither did my personal effort. It just so happened in one of them, I had a little bit more leverage. Now, from a business perspective, that load can be anything, such as sales, making product or making stock. It could be marketing, it could be answering emails, it could be doing your end of year accounts. It's basically anything that requires your direct input. And as you can see, anything that requires your direct input in some way can have leverage applied to make it easier to handle. Now in his podcast, Naval posits that there are 4 ways of generating leverage, 2 of which are old methods and 2 of which are new methods. If we take one of these knives, for example, in the past, if I wanted to make a business selling these, first I would have to get capital, otherwise known as money, in order to get the machines and the materials required to make the knives. And I would have a few ways to do this. I could either go to investors, I could get a grant, I could get a loan or a credit card, or I could just self-fund it, perhaps by working another job and putting profits into this new idea. That last example, the self-funding method, was my way of doing it. In fact, I figured out that over the 5 years I worked at Axminster Tools and Machinery, 3 years of those wages went straight back to the company because I basically invested, 60% of my salary in tools and equipment that I still use to this day. And within all of this equipment was a milling machine and a metal lathe. And these machines were what the original marking knife prototypes were made on. They weren't pretty by any stretch of the imagination, and given the amount of time I took working on them, compounded with the number of losses I had in production and the cheap price I was selling them for, I made a huge loss on them. The footage you're seeing now is from live streams we were hosting at the time, where you could literally watch me make these things from scratch. It's not cutting as efficiently as they should be. And secondly, God damn it! Matt. Look, they've all timed it now, haven't they?
Don't fluff your lines, Matt.
I just did.
Meow, meow. Oh, bugger, sorry, Matt.
That was Warren. And so while making the products, I was also promoting them via videos. And so by promoting these knives via video, I was managed to sort of garner a lot of interest in them. And it quickly became apparent that by working on these things alone, there was no way I was going to be able to keep up with demand. And what's more, there's only so many marking knife videos that I can make before people would inevitably get bored. And so I would have to focus on creating new and fresh videos to keep the channel alive, while also figuring out how to keep the marking knife production up and running. However, by switching my focus to producing new, fresh and inspiring videos for the channel and keeping it vibrant and alive, it then takes time away from the production of the knives, which are the very thing that allows me to fund these videos. But by making those videos, I then drum up more attention to produce the knives that I'm unable to keep up with production. And as you can see, I'm unable to focus on both the production of this and the marketing of that, and I'm just spreading myself very, very thin. And so this is where the second form of leverage comes in, which is labor. And you use a portion of the capital to put towards hiring someone to take on one of those jobs. In my case, this is why I hired Rob. Initially, this was just to help with the media side of things, but that said, even his job role has began to assume various production-based roles too. And much like capital, there are a few different ways that you can generate labor. Just to name a few of them, the first one is obviously hiring someone like I did. The second one would be to subcontract, for example. And the third one, maybe if you're a non-profit or a charity or something, would be through voluntary work. And so if we go back to the knives, eventually in my case, I subcontracted the metal components to a CNC company, which saved a considerable amount of time and wastage on my part. This then bought Rob and I a little bit of extra time so that we could focus on producing new videos to promote the tools and of course grow the channel. And this, in a nutshell, is how old businesses work. You find a problem and then you throw labor at it. This then reduces the friction in producing more capital so that you can hire more labor to throw at more problems, which then just, circulates like that. In fact, before we get onto the new forms of leverage, the animations you're seeing right now are a prime example of me hiring labor to help me with producing this video. And we got them made by hiring a freelancer on Fiverr. Fiverr is an online platform that reduces the friction in finding talented freelancers that can help you with a seemingly endless list of digital services. And yes, while they are a sponsor of this video, I have actually used them a number of times in the past using my own money and had great experiences every time. Initially, it was hiring a remote worker to carry out some administrative tasks for me that otherwise would have cost hours of my time. The next time I used them was to create the Matt's Finest OSB posters I sold a while ago. I simply provided them with a photo of me, some inspiration and themes to follow, and the artist did the rest to a quality that I could have never achieved alone. And now we're using them for animations that we can use in this video and of course on our website. Speaking of websites, when you check out Fiverr, one of the things you'll notice is the incredible array of freelancers available, from website design, AI services, social media marketing, interior design. They've got pretty much everything covered. And what's more, if you've got an oddly specific request, you can have a conversation with Fiverr's new AI-powered search agent, Neo, that will offer the best freelancer matches to your requirements as the conversation evolves. Now, because the variety and amount of freelancers available is so extensive, you need methods of qualifying which ones are more suitable for you and your needs, and Fiverr makes this easy. The first thing you'll notice is that every freelancer has a rating based on previous projects they have delivered, and you can flick through their portfolio to see if their services are suitable for you, as well as seeing the previous clients they have worked with. If you want to be even more specific, let's say you have a budget you need to stick to, or you need something done in 24 hours, let's say, you can use the filters at the top of the page to find someone who's right for you. This is how we found our freelance 3D animator, and upon checking out their portfolio, we're incredibly impressed with the quality of work we could get for the budget we had in mind, and what was delivered certainly lived up to expectations. If you've got a task that can be carried out by a highly skilled freelancer, scroll down and click the link in the description and use the code ESTLY to claim 10% off your next order with Fiverr. Now back to the video. So that covers the two old forms of leverage, but with the introduction of the internet and social media, it's not quite as black and white as labour and capital anymore, and we have two more options for leverage at our disposal. The third option for leverage is media, which is my kind of preferred realm of leverage, because the truth is that when it comes to capital, I'm actually not that good at generating income, seeking grants. I'm generally too risk averse to get loans, and when it comes to labour, I'm just not very good at, I don't really know the hiring process that well, and again, I'm quite risk averse and I would much rather do it myself. So the two old forms, I know how they work, I can do them, push comes to shove, but I'm not a natural at them. When it comes to media, however, this is the area that I do feel qualified to talk in. So let's go back to the example of producing these knives, where you need one person making them and one person selling and marketing them. I've already said that my way of selling and marketing the knives was via video. And the advantage of video is that it's up there forever. You know, I've got videos that are years old by this point that people still continue to watch and still have all the links in the descriptions and calls to actions that I made all those years ago. And so those videos are effectively doing my selling for me. If you now compare that one-to-one with labour, let's say hiring a door-to-door salesman, I can only get as many potential leads and conversions as that door-to-door salesman is able to fit in one day. By having media, not only is that door-to-door salesman able to work day and night, but they can do their job on a much larger scale and they're not going to demand a salary at the end of the month. And so effectively what I'm saying is the content I put out there effectively become my little workers doing my marketing for me. They can reach far more people than an individual can alone, do so at a fraction of the price, and what's more, it's literally me promoting the products to my own customers rather than a representative for the company. So there's a ton of benefits here alone, and you know, when it comes to YouTube, the more videos I add to that pool, the bigger that marketing bubble kind of becomes. So now you've seen a rundown of how I generated self-funded capital, which I could then throw towards labour in the form of subcontracting to make the components and hiring Rob to help me with the videos, and then how I'm using media to sort of help market that. And this leaves us with the final option of leverage, which is code. Now don't be put off by this word code. While this could literally mean sitting there writing code, More broadly, what I'm talking about here is the use of software. You know, the simplest example of this would be using a digital calendar rather than something like this. You know, a digital calendar, you can put stuff in there at a click of a button. It will remind you at meetings. You can join them at a click of a button. Analog things certainly have their place. I do very much like things like this, but you can't deny that if you're pressed for time or you want to dedicate your time towards more meaningful things than writing in here, something's got to give. And if you swapped this for a digital calendar, that is you using a very simple form of code to reduce your personal effort in one area so that you can allocate it towards other things. But you know, let's look at the other end of this. Perhaps you're a technophobe and you hate the idea of using digital calendars and you do much prefer doing something like this. You know, that's absolutely fine. In fact, most of the CNC manufacturers and subcontractors that we use are still very old school in the way that they practice their business. They don't promote online. They still send invoices via post. They do all of these things. But if you look a little bit more closely at these CNC manufacturers, you'll see that the machines they're running are run using code. This, of course, is a form of code that does have a higher barrier of entry, but if you compare what they had to do in the olden days when people were sitting there on manual machines milling all of these metal components by hand, compared to the machines now like sliding head lathes that produce our knives for us that can be left running overnight and you just turn up in the morning and pick everything up. You know, this is a very high form of code, but it is leverage nonetheless. You know, one person can now run 5 machines and those 5 machines run overnight. It's massively scalable, but it is at the upper end of things. And so it's up to you to find forms of code that you can use between CNC manufacturing and something as simple as a digital calendar. This is also why AI, regardless of what you think of it, is still massively underutilized by so many people. You know, to get some of the shots for this video, we had to fly a drone over this industrial estate. And while I could sit there and apply my own personal effort, typing out that risk assessment as I've done many times before, or I could hand it off to Rob, for example, and allocate labor towards the problem, but you know, in doing so, I'm using up his time. Why waste my time or his time when I could just ask AI to do it? It would do so in 1/100th of the time, probably do so to 100 times more accuracy than either him or I could manage. And then it would only require an extra 5 or 10 minutes from myself or Rob to sort of fill in the more specifics and of course sanity check everything. It just helps us get the bulk of the work done so that we can focus on, let's face it, more meaningful tasks than worrying about a 249 gram drone crashing into a van, probably mine. And again, just as a reminder, if you're watching this video, you have access to these 2 new forms of leverage, whether that's creating media on your phone or whether that's the use of free AI tools or software in order to free up your time so you can dedicate it towards more meaningful tasks, whether that's creating capital or if it's just wanting to find more free time to do things that you love doing. It's all there to be used, which is something that can't be said for the 2 old forms of leverage, where the barrier of entry is much higher and, let's face it, much more risky to be involved with. You know, hiring labor and having people's livelihoods depend on you is a scary thing. I've only got 1 employee and it terrifies me. Whereas videos, you know, do what they want. Now, question is, have I handed off enough? Absolutely not. I'm not even going to leave a pause for effect in that. No. The reason that videos are so few and far between these days compared to what they used to is because of all these other things behind the scenes that I am taking on myself rather than hiring labor to do. That's both a function of me being risk averse and also I do generally love doing those things, and I didn't get into YouTube as such to become a YouTuber. I actually got into this YouTube side of things because I wanted to make what I wanted to make when it came to woodworking and not rely on clients and stuff. I just wanted to be able to focus on what I want to do and monetize it through any other means, and YouTube was the way that I could do that. But with all that said, I am starting to hand off tasks to other people. You know, we've got Rob working full time here now. We've also got Nathaniel Griffiths helping us out, sort of produce the knives, so he does all the turning and the initial finishing of it, and then we take it back here to do the sort of final polishing, the thumb holds and the packaging and everything. And we're also looking at getting another hire very soon, just to sort of help with general workshop tasks like packing orders, running the CNC machines, whether that's the lathe or the laser cutters or the laser engravers or whatever we've got in that room. It's just all things that Rob and I should not be working on. Although we really like it, we need to hand them off eventually. And the reason we haven't thus far is it comes down to 2 things. Firstly, it's being risk averse, and secondly, it's wanting to stay close to the work that we love doing. So in conclusion, make sure the venture that you're hoping to go forward in outweighs the sacrifices you're going to have to make in order to be successful. Secondly, be accountable for your decisions. Don't blame the world or other people for your failings or setbacks. Instead, train yourself to look for new opportunities within the new environment you find yourself in. Third, start looking at businesses through the lens of leverage. For example, if you see a banner at a bus stop, that's media doing the selling rather than a door-to-door salesman. If you send an email to someone and you get an automated response back saying, "I'll respond to you in a week or so's time," that's that person using code as leverage to save them time responding to you while they're sitting on a beach somewhere. Once you start looking for it and understand the mechanisms at play, honestly, it demystifies everything. It's just a matter of figuring out how you're going to play that game using your own methods. And finally, I just wanted to finish up with this, which kind of encapsulates everything that I've said, which is to give more than you ask for. Shouting in people's faces, expecting to influence their decisions, then pleading victimhood when they don't listen to you, will only alienate them quicker. Instead, familiarize yourself with the people you're hoping to influence and then help them genuinely. And what's more, don't expect anything in return, because most of the time you probably won't get it. We've got millions of views across this channel, most of which came and went and never purchased anything from us. And that is absolutely fine, because I set up that expectation from the beginning. And if I did have a problem with that, I would need to have serious conversations with myself as to whether this career is for me or not. And that's no one else's responsibility but mine. If you go out of your way to help people, you set an example as to why your product, your service, or just you as an individual is worthy of people's time and money, and that they are able to trust you in delivering what you can offer them. And here's the thing, right? While I've tried to mitigate it as much as possible, I recognize that there is quite a lot of survivorship bias in this video. If you were to follow all of these principles word for word, there is still a chance that it won't work. But here's the thing, you have to believe it will. Interestingly, it's not the application of these ideas that guarantee success, but rather the absence of them that guarantees failure. If you're not combining skills, learning, or creating leverage in your business, you're going to be fighting the constant uphill battle of trying to stay relevant, a hill which is only going to get steeper as AI becomes more and more pervasive. If your mindset sucks, even if you have all the accolades and the financial success under your belt, you're going to be completely unfulfilled in what you do, and most people will probably find you completely insufferable to be around. And finally, if you don't give value to people first, no one is going to give you the time of day when you ask it from them. You can point at anything in this workshop behind me and I'll be able to trace it back to one of the concepts I've shared in this video. And you might be feeling slightly underwhelmed by how basic some of them are, but that's the reality of it. Everyone starts at different points in life and there's an infinite amount of paths you can take along the way, but the only person that can fundamentally shape your future is you. And I hope that this video can become the catalyst for change in someone's life. See you next time.